This is the second presentation on the accounts receivable audit, which is section 2 of the IDEA version 9 workbook. This presentation will begin on page 50 of the workbook. Here we're going to do some random record sampling. So I'm going to begin by selecting the correct database. So I just opened up the accounts receivable, and underneath that I have accounts receivable March 31st, 2012. This was the file we extracted in the previous video. I'll double click here and make it the active database. So here we see all the data. We can see the control total over on the right. Now I'm going to go to the Analysis tab on my ribbon. And in the Analysis tab, I find the Sample group and select the Random option. I'll click there. That brings up a random record sampling dialog window. Now let's take a look at what we need to enter here. First of all, I want to select 20 records. I'm not going to change the random number seed from its default value. The reason for being able to provide a random number seed is sometimes you may want to replicate a random sample. If you use the same random number seed, you will get exactly the same set of random numbers that you had the first time. Now let's take a look at this. Notice that the random number seed is 19944. I'm going to cancel out of the random record sampling, and I'm going to go right back in. Notice that that random number seed has changed. So every time you go into random sampling, IDEA will give you a different random number seed. Once again, I want to select 20 records. We want to include all of the records for possible selection, beginning with record number 1 and going all the way through record number 253. I'm not going to check the box for Allow Duplicate Records. If you check this box, you will be sampling with replacement. That means you could select the same record more than one time. We want to select 20 distinct records, so I'm going to leave that box cleared. In the file name box, I'm going to make that read Sample of Accounts Receivable, abbreviated of course, Transactions. Now I can run OK, or just click on OK to do the random sample. So notice we now have a new file. It reads Sample of Accounts Receivable Transactions. We've got a new control total. And if you take a look at our File Explorer, you'll see that this sample of accounts receivable transactions falls under Accounts Receivable March 31st, 2012. We've got 20 records. They're all different. And if we scroll all the way over to the right, we see a new field that was added to this table called Sample Record Number. This tells us where the record selected was located in our original database. So for example, the very first one, this very first line was record number 37 in Accounts Receivable March 31st, 2012. Now I'm going to go to the File tab, Database, and we will close the database. Okay, we're back in accounts receivable March 31st, 2012. I'm continuing on the top of page 53 in the IDEA workbook. Our next activity is to prepare an aging analysis. So we make sure that accounts receivable March 31st, 2012 is the active database, and then from the Analysis tab in the Categorize section, we'll select Aging. In this Aging dialog window, we've got to select an aging date, and I want to change that to April 1st, 2012. We want to use the day after the end of the period that we're studying. So the last day of the period is March 31st. Therefore, we want the aging date to be April 1st, 2012. The aging field to use is date, and the amount field that we want to total is the gross amount. So we don't have to change those selections. Notice for our aging interval, we can do that in days, months, or years. I'm going to leave it in days. We'll make the first aging period 31 days, aging period 2 59 days, period 3 91 days, and period 4 121 days. We only want 4 aging intervals. So I'm going to zero out number 5. I don't have to worry about number 6 because as long as we have the 0 for interval number 5, we will only have the first 4 intervals in our aging analysis. I'm not going to select the Generate Detailed Aging Database option. I'm not going to select the Generate Key Summary Database. I do want to change the name of my result file, and I want to call that Age Analysis Report. Now I click OK to generate. Okay, the reason why I'm getting this error is I ran through this exercise previously, so it won't allow me to use the same exact name. I'll work around that by simply calling this number 2. Click on OK, and there we go. We've got the analysis done. So if you take a look in the results area, here's my first run of this report, and then we see the new one added, Age Analysis Report 2. Please review the information on the bottom half of page 55 in the IDEA workbook. That will explain what all these fields are in our aging analysis. But I want to go ahead and view the results as a graph. So up here in the left-hand corner, that first icon, we'll toggle between a graphical view and this data grid. By clicking, I go to the graphical view, and immediately that's telling me something is wrong. I don't have anything in the first 4 periods. I've got everything in 121 days plus. And I think I know what happened. I made a mistake when I did my aging analysis. So let's go back to the grid. Let's go back to our database and review the data. And let's try this aging analysis once again. What I missed doing was setting the appropriate date. So I have to go back and find April 1st, 2012. So I'm scrolling back through my calendar, won't take very long. And I go to April 1st, 2012. That's fine. The aging field is correct. The gross amount is correct. My aging interval in days, I've got to reset those numbers. So let me do that quickly. First period is 31, second period is 59, third is 91, fourth is 121. I'll zero out number 5. And I've got to come up with a new name here, so I will call this Age Analysis Report number 3 and click on OK. So here's my current age analysis report. Let's go back and toggle over to the graphical view. Now I've got a graph that is the same as the one that appears on page 56 in the workbook. And you can actually see it's a little hard to make out, but there's something here in error. There's also something here in zero. We actually do have some invoices after the cutoff date and before the beginning of the year. I'm now on the top of page 57 in the workbook. What I'm doing is right-clicking on the chart and then selecting Properties. And here we can make different changes to the appearance of the chart, but the one I'm going to demonstrate is to click on 3D. And so that will give me a three-dimensional view, a three-dimensional effect. When I click on OK, you can see the results of that view. I'm going to right-click once again on the chart and select Edit Title. And let's put a descriptive title here, Aging at April 1st, 2012. And we can use the y-axis list box to display different things in the chart. So we had it at number of records. I'm going to go down and display net value. There's some very easy ways to work with this chart to show different things, to change the appearance of the chart. I'll go back here to this icon and go back to the grid view to show all of those values. Let me click on Data so that we see all of our data for this accounts receivable March 31st, 2012 database. Please review the material on pages 58 and 59 in your workbook to get a better understanding of this database window. But now we're going to continue on the bottom half of page 59 and extract high value invoices and old invoices. So we will be looking for invoices that exceed $10,000 and invoices that are dated prior to January 1st, 2012. Once again, I make sure that accounts receivable March 31st, 2012 is the active database. In my Analysis tab, I'll go to the Extract area and select Direct to do a direct extraction of data. So here we have the direct extraction window. I'm now at the top of page 60 in the IDEA workbook. I'm going to change the default file name to high value amounts. Let me spell that right. I'll click on the equation editor button and wait for all of the fields to appear on the screen. What I'm going to do is to select gross amount, and I want that to be greater than, and then I'll type in the dollar amount, which is $10,000. Be careful when you're entering amounts, don't enter the currency symbol or the thousands separator. Now I will check to see if this is a valid equation. Yes, it is. So I will validate and exit. That's my first direct extraction. But I'm going to do a second direct extraction at the same time. I'll click on this second row, and once again I'm going to change the default file name to old invoices. I'll click on the formula button, the equation editor. What I'm going to do is to select the field date, and I want that date to be less than or equal to December 31st, 2011. Now I could just type that in, or I could use my calendar and go back, just page back through the calendar. Here we go. December 31st, 2011. And notice that it automatically puts it within quotation marks. So I'm looking for invoices dated on or before December 31st, 2011. Make sure it's a valid equation, and then validate and exit. So now I've got these two direct extractions specified, and you'll see the criteria for each one over here towards the right. We're going to extract all of the records, so we'll look through all 253 of them, and I'll run OK to do the direct extractions. And notice over here under accounts receivable, we've got the high value amounts, and we also have the old invoices. Right now, high value amounts is active. There are 10 invoices. They all exceed $10,000, so that extraction worked properly. We've got the total over here of $139,000 plus. I can take a look at old invoices, just double click there, and we've got 3 of those. We can see what they total, something over $5,000, but when we check the dates, all 3 are before 2012. Now the advantage of performing multiple extractions at once is that if you've got a large database, this can save quite a bit of time. Here we did 2 extractions in a single pass through the database. I'm going to move to page 62 in the workbook, and I'm going to close old invoices and close the high value amounts. Again, I'm checking to make sure that accounts receivable March 31st, 2012 is my active database. What we're going to do now is to find all credit notes or credit memos. These will be transactions where the type is equal to the capital letter C. And we're going to find these records using the criteria property. So I've got my database open, and over here under properties, I'm going to click on criteria. This again opens up the equation editor, and we have to wait for all the fields to load. What we're looking for is the field type, and we're checking to see if the field type, I double click so I got two equal signs. Let me leave those there for just a moment. Open parentheses. I'm sorry, I don't want an open parentheses. I want the quotation marks, and inside the quotation marks, a capital C. Now I left in this extra equal sign just to show you what happens when you go to validate. Invalid parameter. Well, it's easy to fix. I'll just remove the extra equal sign and the extra space. Try it again, see if that works. It's a valid equation. And I will validate and exit. And what it's doing right now is retrieving all of the records that meet the criterion I specified, namely that type is equal to capital C. So notice, first of all, that our control total has gone down, and if we scroll, we'll see that we've only got 34 records here that meet the specified criterion. I'm going to go ahead, also notice before I do anything more, where we have the criteria link, it tells us the criteria that have been applied. And if I do a right click, I can clear that. So now we're back looking at the entire accounts receivable March 31st, 2012 database. And I'm going to try a different criterion. This time I'm going to use gross amount and look for a gross amount that's less than 0. So when I go ahead, let's check it. It's a valid equation. Then I'll validate and exit. Now the records are being selected. Notice when I scroll down, I've got 44 items. And if you look, some of them are type C, which are credit memos that we saw earlier, but some of them are type P, which would indicate a payment. Again, the criteria displays as gross amount less than 0. If I right click here, I can clear the criterion. And I'm back to the entire accounts receivable March 31st, 2012 database. On page 64 of the workbook, the differences between extractions and criteria are explained. But it's important to understand that when you use the criteria link, you're simply displaying the selected records. You are not creating a new database. When you do a direct extraction, on the other hand, you select the records and put them into a separate table. Let's move to the top of page 65 in the manual. Here we're going to calculate the net transaction amount. To do this, we're going to use a virtual or calculated field. So once again, we're making sure that accounts receivable March 31st, 2012 is the active database. We're looking at the data view. And from the data tab in the ribbon, I'm going to select the field manipulation task. Now watch closely, because it's over here under define action field. And then in the lower right hand corner, there's an arrow that will get us to field manipulation. So I click on that, and it brings up the field manipulation window. I'm continuing now on the top of page 66. I will click on the Append button to add a new field to the database. I'm going to call that new field NET, N-E-T. It's going to be virtual numeric. I don't put anything in for length, but I do specify the number of decimal positions as 2. Now here again, I had done this previously, so let me go back just so you'll see the example. I'm going to call this net2. You wouldn't really need to do this in practice, but because I've been experimenting with its database, I already did this activity earlier. So my description is going to be net amount, and I'll click the parameter box. That again brings up the equation editor, but once there we have all the fields, and so my calculation is the gross amount minus, and then I've got to open up parentheses. I'm going to subtract the sum of the two taxes. So it's goods and services tax plus the provincial sales tax, and close parentheses. Now let's check that to make sure we typed it correctly. My calculation is the gross amount less the sum of the two taxes. Let's check to make sure it's valid, and then we will validate and exit. So now we've got my net2 in the field manipulation screen. And I'll click OK. This is just a warning about making changes through field manipulation, but this is exactly what I want to do. And if you take a look, scroll over to the right, here I have my net2 column. Now these are both the same because I've done this activity 2 times. Notice that these virtual fields are shown in teal. It kind of looks green on my screen. It's supposed to be teal. But that's to help you recognize calculated fields instead of fields that were imported originally. If we go to the history of the database, this is going to tell you everything that happened. Here's when I did the append earlier today. And then right here is where we just created that net2 field with all of the details. This concludes the video. There will be one additional video on the accounts receivable audit, section 2, in the IDEA workbook.